just heard, Washington's funding cuts are rippling across conflict zones. Another major change since President Trump took office? The mounting pressure on the pharma sector to invest more in the U.S. From most favored nation pricing to tariff threats, the strategy to make companies bend is glaringly obvious. How can Europe weather this uncertain era? That's the focus of the next conversation. Please give a warm round of applause to the speakers joining this conversation.
Hello, everyone, and very warm welcome to our next session, which will touch on many aspects, starting from tariffs and most favorite nation clause, ending with whether Europe needs more friends. The session will run for 45 minutes, and we will have a Q&A at the end of it, so please do think of questions that you would like to ask our speakers that I will represent right now. So we have Graham Cookson. He's the Chief Executive Officer at the Office of Health Economics based in the UK. Daria Kuruc-Poye, Vice President of the European Association of Health Pharmacists, and Alexander Natz from UCOPE, mid-sized biotech lobby. And we will have a surprise speaker. As you can see, we have another chair, but we're keeping an intrigue for a bit later. So I would like to start by saying that we're living in an unusually unpredictable world. Long-standing alliances are being questioned, geopolitical tensions are rising, and even the most stable assumptions in global trade are suddenly up for debate. This year, we saw something unprecedented, the US threats of tariffs on pharmaceuticals and most favored nation pricing. Layer on top of that, the ongoing disruptions in global supply chains, and it forces a simple but uncomfortable question. Does Europe actually have enough friends to keep medicines flowing? And if not, where should those new partnerships come from? So to begin with, let's actually try to better understand what's the situation now, right? What is the reality that companies are living in? So here I would love to bring in Alexander right away. The summer was really intense. So could you share what's the reality for biotech companies? And maybe, I remember you mentioned to me that there were 3 companies that were thinking whether to invest in Europe after the most favorite nation clause was announced. How is it going? Maybe there are more companies like this now.
Thanks very much, Gidre. I mean, indeed, the summer was extremely intense. Spring was already intense. I have the feeling like intensity is even increasing now. We are not just talking about tariffs, which is a tool which we haven't seen in the pharmaceutical and I think also in the medtech industry to apply for the last decades. I mean, our sectors were carved out from tariffs for good reasons, if I may say that. So we have not just seen that announcement with 15% over summer, but we've also seen letters sent to a couple of CEOs by the administration in the US that most favored nation policies should be implemented, which for our members, for the smaller companies, is equally a very big hurdle and a very big issue. And you mentioned that, I mean, when you talk to companies, that has changed quite a bit. Like when you compare like the discussions you had earlier this year they were more like the normal discussions. Where do I launch first? But there was no question about whether I would come to Europe. And that's probably in particular true for the small companies. I would say for the newcomers to Europe, for companies which have been launching their products for sure in countries like Germany first, and then expand their products into other territories in Europe. And it's true that those companies had to reconsider what would it mean if I launch in a given country, because in many countries such as Germany, there's no real confidential pricing, so the price is out, not just the list price, but also the negotiated price. And that is a certain risk where companies have to make decisions whether to postpone launch or to come at all to Europe. The good news is I don't think the decisions have been made yet. I think there is a bit of a waiting and watching type of situation, especially when it comes to most favored nation. But what I hear from our constituency in UCOP is that the most favored nation for our members, or many of our members, are more putting even more uncertainty to the table than when you compare it to the tariffs, which is already a big blow.
You're mentioning that they are waiting to see what comes next. Are they watching only the US or also what the EU is doing?
Well, they're primarily watching the US. They're primarily watching the executive order, which I understand is there, but needs to be filled with life. We have seen this generous model published 10 days ago. So they're watching primarily the measures in the US, because actually it shows like we're living in a globalized world. We are comparing prices, we're benchmarking prices. And if I may say, I think there is some improvement, if I may call it improvement, in that sense that the benchmarking is only happening towards G7 countries and Denmark and Switzerland, which is adding a little bit more certainty. So you know which country is in the country basket, but they are more, and first and foremost, watching the US measure to play out. But they are also, and I think this is really the call on us here in Europe, watching what the European Union is doing. And this is not only here the decision makers in Brussels. I think there is not much we can do about pricing and reimbursement in the member states, because it's a national decision whether we want to put our net prices into the public domain or whether we want to keep them confidential. So we really have to go national to convince, and that's what we have started to do, to really also raise the awareness in national capitals about the importance of these measures, which are taken on the other side of the Atlantic, but which have direct impacts on European patients. And certainly we should have those discussions. We need to continue those discussions here in Brussels, but also, and maybe even more importantly, at the member state level, because they decide about pricing and reimbursement.
I would love to bring in Daria here. We're hearing from the industry side. We already experienced shortages even before that. Is the situation even worse in the pharmacies now? Like, do you feel that there is an impact from what has been happening over summer?
Regarding the tariffs, actually we do not feel like direct consequence. We feel like consequence when we are procure medicines, as we are on the front line to ensure continuity of care for our patients, for having there the best option of medicine, but also medical devices available. And whenever some market is disrupted or with tariffs, actually we also, it also have the flow on our everyday workflow, because sometimes the pricing is very high and we have limited budgets. We have to think about, okay, if I will spend a lot on this medicine, how will it affect the other patient that maybe is not that severely ill? So will I have enough money to buy the medicine for the other patient? So actually, unfortunately, this affects the patients the most. But the good thing, as we are hospital pharmacists and we are really experts in medicines, we usually manage to procure with the best option of medicines possible still. But as it's already mentioned, we have to coordinate these measures. We have to work together to find the way how we will make this mechanism much more on national and European level, more tangible for us to procure the medicines that are best for our patients. Because sometimes this pricing, for example, we are having the report of our shortages survey that will be released next week. So these are preliminary results for the top 3 reasons of shortages that were reported by healthcare professionals, but hospital pharmacies, the most one among them were pricing. And this is for the first time that the hospital pharmacists reported pricing. Usually it's global shortages of active pharmaceutical ingredient, manufacturing issues, supply issues, but for the first time this year they reported pricing. So this is really, really important for us as a hospital pharmacist on the front line to be aware and to try to ensure best medicine possible to patients. As sometimes we are wrongly charged that we are the one doing the shortages, that we didn't like order medicines in time, which can like, so they tell the patients, pharmacists didn't offer the best option to you. That's why your illness went much more worse than it should be. But this is why we have to all coordinate, and we have to also make physicians and nurses aware of this problem, not just like heroes and policymakers as well, but also the ones on the front line.
You mentioned that there were top 3 reasons. One of them is for shortages is pricing. What are the other 2?
So the first one was the global shortages of active pharmaceutical ingredient, as unfortunately we are still dependent on Asian markets, as other countries, not just Europe, is. And manufacturing problems, tendering prices as well as, for instance, the top medicine shortages are antimicrobials, and this is and oncology medicines as well, which are really have unfortunately really low prices, and it's not really interesting for the manufacturer to manufacturers. So. And so the prices have went down so much that now when there are tariffs, they cannot compete anymore with the pricing.
Thank you very much. I think before giving the floor to Graham, I would like to invite our 4th speaker, Oliver Bizatza, Chief of MedTech Europe, representing Medicine Technologies, to the stage. Thank you very much for jumping in. I know that you're not staying for the full panel as well, but I thought it would be great to hear how medical devices are also affected by what's happening globally. Daria also mentioned medical devices. So, what's the reality in your field?
Thanks for asking. Medical devices are not drugs, but much of what I've heard from Alexander and others matches our experience. For many, many years, tariffs on medical devices have been at a near zero for very good reason. It was understood that adding unnecessary cost into the supply chain for these products was going to trickle down and affect healthcare budgets, which are already under great strain. So the imposition of a 15% tariffs on devices sent to the US has an impact. The US market is tremendously important for most medical device manufacturers. But that's only a tariff on the final good, right? Just like an iPhone or many other forms of technology, we're an assembly industry. So before we can even make the final device, we need to procure an enormous amount of plastics, metals, electronics, specialty chemicals that need to reach that final assembly plant before they can be put together. And if those individual raw materials are also tariffed, you actually have a magnifying effect on the cost of producing the goods. So that's an increase in the price of producing goods. Companies now need to decide on their own strategy how they weather that impact, which was definitely not on the cards a year ago, right? Do they try and stomach the costs by eating to their R&D budgets? Do they try and stomach the costs by delaying or downgrading future projects? Do they discontinue product lines they wanted and expected to keep? Is there an impact on staffing? Or do they try and increase the price of the device? In many industries like consumer goods, it's somewhat straightforward to increase the price, because I don't know about you guys, if my phone becomes more expensive, I'll be annoyed, but I'll still pay the price. You can't do that in healthcare so easily, especially in a part of the world like Europe, where it's paid for by the public purse. So that extra cost actually ends up having an impact on the healthcare system too, even though on paper it looks like it's just the American consumer who's affected.
Thank you very much. And I will give the, kind of heavy task for Graham now. We heard from industry, we heard from pharmacists about the reality now. How ultimately this will affect patients, and not only now, but let's see, in 5-10 years, what is the situation? I feel like everyone is playing a bit in silos now as well, right?
Yeah, so I think it's a kind of perfect storm of 3 kind of policies as a triangle at the minute. So we've got most favored nation pricing, which is trying to get other countries to pay what the US will say is a fairer share or a greater share of the innovation costs. Then we've got trade policies such as tariffs and the Section 232 investigations, which are being used together to try and allow America to take a greater share of the kind of the benefits of the pharmaceutical, medtech sector, life sciences generally, by trying to reshore more of that to the US, right? The problem is, starkly, they're often conflicting. So if on the one hand what you want to do is to lower prices for US consumers by raising them elsewhere, but then you're slapping tariffs on, that doesn't work. Similarly, if it is effective and we see onshoring of manufacturing to the US, that will drive up prices as well. It's not going to be cheaper to manufacture goods in the US than it is to manufacture them elsewhere in the world, especially if you then try and do API manufacturing in the US as well. So ultimately, these two policies kind of collide. In the short term, what we're seeing, right, is paralysis on the European side. Nobody knows what to do. We're seeing delay in investment decisions. Policymakers don't seem to know what to do, which is always worrying. And as Alexander said, there is a conflict between health being a national competency and trade being an EU competency, and whether or not that can be coordinated. So in the short term, I don't think we're going to see very much happening apart from all of that impact being passed on to costs. And in the US, that will get passed on to consumers, to patients ultimately, whereas in Europe, as you say, it's unlikely to do that. In the longer term, I think we have even worse situation. So we're going to see less innovation because costs are going to rise, but some of that's going to have to be weathered by companies, which means they're going to spend less. That's what we call the elasticity of innovation, right? It's the responsiveness of innovation investments to the profits of individual companies. It means less breakthrough technologies. It's also going to probably mean a contraction of industry, so fewer jobs. And ultimately, that means a worse situation for patients. But I think we focus so much on the commercial and the economic now, we forget the big picture. And we forget one of the vital lessons we probably learnt in the pandemic, which is that we need resilient supply chains. We want them to allow us to be prepared for the next pandemic when it comes. And if we get a much more isolationist world, if we're making everything for the American market in America and for the rest of the world outside, I think that's a really worrying situation. So unfortunately, I don't think it's a great time. I mean, ultimately, no one has ever said tariffs are a good thing apart from one person. Unfortunately, that's a very powerful person.
Thank you so much, Graham. I love that you brought up resilient supply chains. I know that Oliver will need to leave us soon, but I want to give you one question before you have to go. I was listening one event where Health Minister of Southwest German state was saying that dependence on third countries is still too high, and basically saying that we depend too heavily on China and Europe should have better cooperation with other countries. I wonder how is it going in medtech sector specifically, because quite recently Europe decided not to work with Chinese as much, right? So what's there, and are you searching for new friends there across the globe?
This is a fantastic question, because I think the real trend we're seeing and the real story here is, like many other industries, we're highly globalized, exporting and importing a ton of stuff all over the world. And in that model, which has worked so well, when any country sets up protectionist barriers, it's always been a headache. There was a time not that long ago where China, Russia, maybe a couple of other countries were the only ones really doing this. And the EU, funnily enough, used to be one of our staunchest champions to try and get those market access barriers lifted. Fast forward to now, and you have ongoing challenges in some of those markets like China. You've got protectionism in the US, which took the form of tariffs. But let's face it, we've also got the specter of protectionism here in Europe, with some national and European politicians talking very openly about how they want to only allow products made in Europe into the procurement market. So it's taking different forms depending on which country you look at and which region you look at. But it's the rise of protectionism after many, many decades of a globalized world, which for our sector at least worked. And I would indeed question whether that is actually improving world resilience for goods like healthcare products, on which we all depend. I don't have an answer to it, but that's the trend I'm observing. It's all the different forms of protectionism arising in the post-COVID era.
Thank you very much, Oliver. I know you have to go. Round of applause for Oliver. We will continue. And Graham, would you like to react to what we just heard?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really worrying that one of the responses that Europe can have to a more protectionist US is to impose reciprocal tariffs, but also to erect other trade barriers. And ultimately, that will also be bad both for European countries and patients. So we need to try and avoid that. Nothing good will come out of this. We will see either costs rising or the quality of products going down. In a globalized world, we've optimized our supply chains to get the best quality, low-cost goods. So yeah, I think I agree. It's challenging times ahead.
And so, do you think that Europe needs more friends ultimately? And what actually that minister said, better cooperation with other countries that don't try to compete with us, which is maybe hard to find, no?
I mean, that's a pretty silly, sorry, whoever said that, statement. And we can always do with more friends. Who doesn't like friends? And I know the title of this session was kind of friendshoring, but I think, you know, you can have good friends and bad friends. I think it's more about trust shoring, right? What we want are relationships that we can trust our partners. It should be mutual beneficial. So yeah, we're losing something. We may be buying goods from another country, another company, and that costs us something, but we should then be getting something in return and in terms of being able to sell things as well. I do think that there has also been a kind of a danger that we focus on a small number of Asian markets now for API. So if we look to India and China, and I think that's worrying as well because it does lead to supply and shortage problems as well. So yeah, I think we do need some more friends. And maybe the parts of the world, you know, Latin America, we can look to as well.
How should we define then trusted partner? Should it be political alignment, regulatory standards, everything together?
Yeah, I think it shouldn't necessarily be pure regulatory alignment, but mutual recognition of kind of equivalent regulations and standards. But what you really need is transparency. And for me, the key factor with trust is knowing that the future is predictable. So the problem with the US administration at the minute is whether we agree or disagree with the policy, we can't expect it's going to be the same policy next week. There's this kind of almost policy whiplash that everyone's having where we see, you know, tariffs imposed, then the pause, and they go up, then they go down, then there's another policy here and another policy there. And whilst all of these policies, I think, are bad policies, companies and countries could adapt to them if they were fixed and predictable. But we don't have that, and that's what we want in trust, I think, it's predictability.
Talking about supply chains, Alexander, what's your take? Should we diversify? Should we search for new partners?
Well, first of all, I wanted to make that point, which I think Olivier has made as well. I think counter tariffs are very often not the solution, because when we look at innovation in the innovative segment, especially in rare diseases, innovation comes very much from US companies, and we need those products in European markets. So just by increasing the price of those medicines, the patient is not helped, the healthcare system is not helped. I don't think that's a solution. I think we also have to clearly differentiate what are we talking about. Are we talking about generics? And I think it was also mentioned that, I mean, for me, tendering has definitely played a role in the phenomenon that we have seen generic manufacturing moving in the 2010 or maybe even before to China and India, which is not a problem per se, but we have to pick and now what we're doing in the Critical Medicine Act is we're picking and choosing the compounds, the APIs, which we want to produce here. And it's not always about the carrot and the stick, and sometimes I feel in Brussels the thinking is very much like, do we want to do something good for industry, or do we want to put a sanction out? It's about, for example, about clever procurement mechanisms like it has been done in generics in Germany. For example, some insurances tender AMR products in a way that they do 2 lots, one global lot and one European lot. So if they have a shortage, if they don't get supply from India, China, they have one European manufacturer for that AMR product. I think that's that's clever in a way, and that's addressing the problem. And maybe that's even incentivizing industry to go into that area where, due to IP protection, we haven't seen so much innovation in the last 30 years in antimicrobial resistance. So let's work with the tools, and also let's have a bit more of a discussion here in Brussels about the lessons learned from the member states. I think that's sometimes missing here. We need to take into consideration what effect has been happening when we talk about tendering. So supply chain, to your question, Gidre, for me, the Critical Medicine Act is pointing in the right direction. To that extent, it really looks into generics, because that's where we had the shortages. Whether we should also bring innovative medicines into that piece of legislation is to be debated, in my opinion, because we also have to make sure that we're not putting too many ingredients out, which in the mix of the companies feel like, well, I don't know how that will play out. I don't know how the EU HTA will play out for me. I don't know what they would do if they go for joint procurement. I don't know what it would all mean. So if there is too much uncertainty in those type of companies, they might try to find other ways to bring products to European patients, and that's not what we want. We want those companies to launch in European markets. So I think we have to differentiate innovative, generic, and I think we have to take the lessons learned from member state experiences. Tendering is a good example, I think.
Thank you, Alexander. I think it's a great point that generics and innovative meds are different kind of animals. We sometimes forget that. Daria, I would like to bring you in here. India and China produce from 60 to 80% of APIs in medicine sold in Europe. From pharmacist side, are you concerned about over-reliance on those two partners?
Of course. For example, when there is some of disruption of supply chain, even temporarily, it really affects hospital pharmacists. So there is none medicine that you can procure. Even, for example, when there was a higher demand, it was 2 years ago, there were cases in the UK for antimicrobial syrup, if you remember, Coamoxiclav, because of too much demand. So the manufacturers could not meet that demand. And for example, if we had the manufacturing in Europe, the problem would be solved. But for example, hospital pharmacists and community pharmacists come with the solution to compound the peroral solution from the IV solution for the children, and that's how we overcame that problem. So in this kind of, I know that the industry is not for that, and me neither, but when you have this kind of critical situation, when you have child with acute bacterial infection that you can really help with, I think hospital pharmacists and community pharmacists are there to help, to compound. And also, we have to think about how to bring, as a really nice example from Germany, production of active pharmaceutical ingredient in the Europe, as it's not that, how do I say, cheap, as in Asian market is really, really much more cheaper and much more cost effective when everybody is counting finances than in Europe. But still, then we have to accept, okay, we'll pay higher prices, but then we can rely on this medicine because it's much more expensive to pay the price of longer hospitalization or deaths or even absence from work. When you're ill, you cannot go to work, so you're absent from work, and it costs the system the money. So it's something that we should think about, and maybe to use actually this negative momentum of tariffs to wake up and to find a solution all together, to have coordinated approach, to come up with a preventive strategy, risk assessments, in order when something like tariffs or shortages happen, not just on European level, but on international level, so we can have already a strategy with flexibility and adaptability to the situation. Similarly, although I know the COVID was not a good example, but procurement and vaccination, it saved a lot of lives. So it really helped us to go through, to live the next morning. So I think it's something that we should all come together and not to think in silos, as was already mentioned by Graham, and to work together.
Yeah. does any of you want to react on what was said? Otherwise, I will open the floor for questions.
I mean, it's boring because I'm going to echo what everyone said, but certainly in terms of, OHG's done lots of work on shortages, and one of the big factors, and you can use it to predict markets where this happens, is where there's been an obsession about price that's driven the market down to a single manufacturer, and that's always a very risky market because that will be a very low margin, high volume market, and that's where you see manufacturing problems leading to shocks, and that's where there's no resilience of supply. So if one manufacturer is hit by a problem, we see a market entry, an exit there. And so I agree, I think what we need is more sophisticated procurement that, achieves value for money, wants to get low prices, but has some sort of diversity of supply and is willing to accept slightly higher prices to keep that.
Do we have, did you want to come in, Alexander? Sorry.
I think that looking into procurement is important for the generic sector and really taking the lessons learned from the member state level. Even the pharma sector inquiry in 2008 looked into tendering partly. So I think that is important. I just wanted to bring in as well the element that we talk very much about generics here, but I think without an innovative product reaching European markets, there won't be any generics in the end as well. I think that's a very important notion which we need to discuss. We need to get the innovation into Europe, otherwise there won't be a generic. And I think we also have to talk clinical trials, because if a company is conducting clinical trials in Europe, the product is already here, not in a commercial setting, but in a pre-commercial setting, and the product is then very likely to stay here. So we need to work to attract innovation. We need to work also on making us more competitive when it comes to clinical trials. I know it's a wider field, but it's a very important one, and I think it's a very important notion to say, like, if companies conducting clinical trial here, is likely the product is likely to stay, and it will reach European patients. That's very point I wanted to make. So Biotech Act is really the important, the big promise there, if I may say.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to open the floor for questions. Do we have any questions on the floor? I don't see hands, but if anyone will come up with a question, I will ask later on again. I loved, Daria, what you said, that we should use this opportunity as a wake-up call to take action. But wasn't COVID already enough to understand that supply chains are not really reliable? Graham, what do you think?
Well, we have very short memories, don't we? And I think with all best intentions, we want to kind of do wash-ups and do learnings. But I think it's human nature. We want to put something as difficult as that behind us, and we forget. But we should learn lessons. Just maybe picking up on kind of what Alexander said there, though, that just came to me is, at the minute we're seeing the world as this new kind of competitive space, and there is a risk that we may use tariffs as kind of tools and weapons against each other. But there is another positive position Europe could try and take, which is, how can we outcompete against America, but not in a kind of not on price, and try and do things which will attract investment across the life sciences sector and make it generally more interesting. So you talked about clinical trials, but thinking about being the best regulator in the world, better adoption of in silico kind of trial approaches, thinking about making access faster, more streamlined. There are other ways in which we can compete with America, I think, and it could be an opportunity there.
Are there any questions at this point? Yeah, I see a hand over there. Please introduce yourself and tell to whom the question is.
Hi, Mike Ruggiero with CSL, biotechnology company. I guess my question is, do you foresee over time at the national level pricing and reimbursement reforms that would improve recognition of value in the biopharmaceutical space? And is anything like that likely to happen in the absence of some momentum building at the European level here in Brussels?
Who would like to go on this one?
I could start if I may.
Yeah.
I mean, we had discussions with some ministries of health about the phenomenon. It's clearly on the radar screen, but I think we need to increase the knowledge about this, about the implications. I do have hope that this will lead to a situation where some countries are not just purely cost contained when they consider pricing about medicines. Let's not forget about the fact that in many of our territories, prices for innovative medicines are negotiated. And in many of those territories or countries, you have 100% purchasing power sitting on the other side of the table. So it's not like what we hear sometimes from some stakeholders that industry has a huge monopoly. The monopoly is very often the buying monopoly on the other side. And if the payer is not willing to pay an adequate price, that is an issue. So I think there will be discussions about this, not about this phenomenon in general, but about the most favored nation policies. And I think, and I hope we don't see in the year 2026 that we have a decrease in marketing authorizations, which would certainly not be due to EMA practice. Let me also say that we have a very competitive, in the positive sense, agency in Amsterdam with regulators which are top edge scientists and have an understanding about regulatory policy. So I think there we are very competitive. But I think there might be a discussion coming at the member state level to really discuss implications of certain pricing mechanisms. For example, in Germany, for a combination product, which many combination products can be highly innovative, but you have to pay a lump sum of 20% on top of the reimbursement amount. I mean, that's not an innovative policy, especially in oncology. If you want to attract oncology products to Europe, just saying that both products because they're prescribed in combination, they have to get 20% discount on top of 7% mandatory discount on top of AMNOG reductions and so on. That's not a wise reimbursement policy. I don't want to blame Germany. I mean, they have some other things which are, I think, moving in the right direction as well. But that's one example where I think we need to talk.
Dalia, you mentioned pricing before as well.
Yeah, and I want to say this is the issues that should be raised, because sometimes here in Brussels bubbles, policymakers are not aware of the problems that even innovative medicines are having. Especially this is the same in other European countries, not just in Germany, because if they want to be competitive in the country, they have to lower the price. And sometimes it's not really convenient for them, but if they want to help patients, they want to help people. So that's the problem that we should all raise and should have to have the problem that we encounter, and to help the innovative medicine to attract, to come to Europe, and to maybe have not down-regulate, but to have like regulation that is much more easier for them to apply, to come to the European market, because the paperwork for everyone is too huge to be like some to balance again between US and the Europe, because long time ago everybody with innovation come to Europe. Now everybody is going away from Europe. And that's one of the problems, because there is a problem that we should think about and should try to fix it.
Graham, on pricing.
Yeah, so I think I'd like to see more countries taking a societal perspective in terms of health and value, rather than a purely health systems focus. And aligned with that, I think we need to believe and act that health is an investment, that it actually could be a driver of economic growth across Europe, where many countries are struggling with productivity problems, with lots of people on sick benefits and out of the workforce. And I think it can be incredibly important. So yes, I'd like us to see a societal benefit with a broader range of values recognized. At the same time, though, if that leads to higher prices, that's only one part of the puzzle. You can have high prices, but if you're in any way going to cap total expenditure on medicines or healthcare, then it's kind of largely just moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic to recognize different elements of value. So we'd need to see commitment to widening the envelope on healthcare expenditure and pharmaceuticals. So I think that would be good and welcome.
Any other questions from the floor? Okay, so I have a terrible question, the last question. What is the single most urgent action Europe must take to secure its medicine supply?
Well, I think it won't like it, but if supply is the issue, then paying more for medicines will achieve two things. It will encourage more companies to to supply, but also it would appease the US administration, which may lead to reductions in tariffs or removal of tariffs.
I just imagine that social insurance would hate that answer.
Well,
no?
everyone would hate that, but apart from obviously the people that benefit. But if the answer to the question is I think unfortunately with
In this reality,
administration,
right?
in the current reality, that is the solution. We may not like the solution and we may choose not to do it, but in my mind, that's the solution.
Daria, would you like to come in?
I will be then more like healthcare professional, how to find a way, how to motivate companies to come to European market. Sometimes it doesn't have to be like pricing. We have a really good example with push and pull incentives on antimicrobials, where you have Netflix models, where you can like have like subscription model where you can incentivize the manufacturers to come to Europe and, for instance, win one product and then have a discount on or a fair pricing with another product, and also to motivate workforce to work here in European markets to have like because unfortunately Europe is the oldest continent from the whole continent in the globally, so we have to find a way how to attract younger people to stay here, to innovate, to not to go to the US, to Harvard, to go to Oxford and to or to Leuven or to Germany to find a way to innovate here in the Europe. So we have to motivate.
Thank you, Alexander.
I think what we can do here in Brussels is really working on our competitiveness, and we're starting to do so. I'm optimistic in that sense because I have seen a shift in policy with the new Commission, with the new Parliament. I have seen more interactions. I have seen more of an industry competitiveness agenda, which I think was needed in a way, because for a long time we've been adding and adding and adding obligations, from wastewater directives to environmental risk assessments. Again, makes sense to have an environmental risk assessment. I'm not against it, and it's also good to have good water quality. But we also have to keep an eye on industry. What does it mean? What is the message we're sending out? So really working on the competitiveness, and there, I must say, I'm optimistic that it is understood that healthcare in general, meaning pharmaceuticals and medical devices as well, likewise great hospitals, which we have in Europe, is an asset rather than a challenge from the cost containment perspective only. And I think we have a great network of physicians we can build on, great universities. Let's harvest that, let's work with that network, harvest fruits from that, and make also innovation flourish, get more R&D into, and also production into Europe. So I'm optimistic that this is understood in a way. Might take some years, but I'm optimistic that when you see the problem, it's an important first step.
Okay, that's great. Let's end on this optimistic note. And I will ask everyone to remain seated for the next session on climate change with Rory O'Neill in just a few seconds. And please give a round of applause to amazing speakers. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So that